Hello there, Arseface.
Yeah.
Arseface.
An honour,
Can I be of assistance?
Arseface.
The one and only Arseface.
Ladies and gentlemen, for your entertainment, I give you Arseface!
Fable was a very notable RPG back in the early 2000s, especially on the original Xbox. A lot of Western RPGs around this time were very dominant on the PC platform, with titles like Diablo, Fallout, Baldur's Gate, or The Elder Scrolls being some of the PC's chosen ones. Console titles of this nature were few and far between, and the Japanese market often claimed dominance on the console RPG scene. The original Xbox, however, made it apparent that Western-style RPGs could also make a home on consoles. Titles like Knights of the Old Republic and even Jade Empire put some respect on the Xbox. And of course, one of the other games to also make a hit was Fable. For a lot of old-time fans, Fable was a very noteworthy RPG game, especially for the scope of freedom that it was trying to go for. A semi-open-ended game where you get to be whatever character you wanted to be was the approach that it tried to convey. Being able to be good or evil, letting you pick and choose skills to make your class, getting absolutely hammered at a bar. Albion made sure that there were plenty of choices that players could make. So having missed my chance to play this game back then, due to my childish ways of only playing FPS shooters and shouting into my Xbox microphone, it was time to finally give this game its due and see how Fable plays more than 20 years later. Fable's story doesn't start off as dramatic as some other games where you're just a simple adventurer, a dead adventurer brought back to life, or a captured adventurer, which almost all these games love to do. Seriously, is being a prisoner the cool thing nowadays for RPGs? Anyway, instead, our hero's origins begin in a village as a child, where he spends his youth pondering the importance of being a hero, or whether he should tell his neighbor that the local strumpet is getting it on with her husband.
What? I've never even met this woman. Who is she?
When the hero realizes that it's his sister's birthday and gets her a gift by doing some good or bad deeds around the village, things take a turn for the worst when bandits raid the village and kill everyone. Nice job, hero. I guess the bandits can't seem to look over this 3-plank fence. With the village in shambles and at a temperature above 600 degrees Celsius, our hero is the sole survivor of the attack. Well, at least the fires of your fellow neighbors will keep you warm at night. Hey Bill, pass the marshmallows, won't you? When he tries to go back home, he is nearly attacked by a straggling bandit, but not before he is saved by a wizard named Maze, who hails from the Heroes Guild.
We must leave. It's not safe here.
Our hero is then recruited into that guild, where he spends his youth training in the arts of combat. Years pass, and our hero becomes old enough to leave in search of his own adventure, either aiding Albion citizens through the various quests, or killing them, if he accidentally accepted a quest without thinking and has to commit to the bit.
You know.
His adventures eventually lead to his past coming back to him, as he learns of the reasons for why his village was raided and why some of his family members were kept alive. The villain who is tied to this attack is finally revealed, and in true RPG fantasy fashion, it's up to our hero to stop him. As far as fantasy stories go, I like how Fable sets up its world by having you start off your adventure pretty much close to your birth. Maybe it's because I haven't seen this narrative style in a lot of Western RPGs of late, but having the story tied to their childhood makes it a lot more personal when compared to stories where you're often the chosen one who has to save the world, bring about change, or light yourself on fire. Granted, 20 years later, the story isn't as fleshed out by today's standards, especially with how fast you go from child to adult in the span of literally one gameplay hour, and the villain only revealing himself later in the game, but if you let go of your 2024 eyes and step back into 2004, this type of story roleplay was very endearing. Seeing your character grow from being a child with oversized hands and feet that were only good for beating up other children, to seeing your character grow into a full-size adult puts a much more personal spin on the RPG aspect. Outside of some RPG games like Dragon Quest, where your character also starts as a kid, you don't really see that many games tackle this style of growth and development, so it was quite refreshing to see. In terms of the other storytelling aspects, Fable's characters aren't really the most memorable, and nearly the majority of the cast have very one-dimensional personalities. You have the quote-unquote ally best friend Whisper, who is constantly jealous of the fact that you are a better hero than she is.
Not bad. Don't think it'll be easy next time, though.
Your mentor Weaver, who serves as your guide, is also the guy who pretty much tells you where to go.
Scythe is waiting for you in Snowspire Village.
There's a variety of characters, but none that really stood out to me as memorable. Even the main antagonist, Jack of Blades, is a very stereotypical villain who simply wants to destroy the world, or rule it. I don't really remember because he's just so atypical.
He wouldn't have seen the end of the day anyway. He had outlived his usefulness.
I'd say the background setting of Albion makes for some of the more fun story parts of Fable, and that's mainly attributed by its population.
No, don't tell me. You were sent here by an irritating young lady, the one with the comatose kid.
Now, your mileage may vary based on whether you're fond of the sheer number of British that is abundant in this game, along with every other European-based accent that the game tries to employ.
My dear husband was lost to the waters years ago. He went on a fishing expedition and never came back.
But the NPCs have a wide range of silly personalities across each of the different towns. Fable's setting and tone is on the more lighthearted side in terms of fantasy, so silliness tends to be the overarching attitude for most of them. I think it's a fun setting, and I enjoyed the more PG aspect of Fable, and if you're one for doing a lot of side quests, you'll be encountering a lot of them. A fun, lighthearted, and humorous world to dive into, with a semi-serious but a little forgettable story. For 2004, I'd say the length and depth of the writing feels appropriate for what they're trying to achieve, but it does feel a bit short and a little too conventional by today's standards. When we do get our first taste of gameplay, it begins in our hero's village as a child, where he learns the ins and outs of performing good deeds or bad ones. It's an interesting basis for what the game establishes as the good or evil alignment system, by having you make those choices early on as a kid. When you get whisked away to the guild, you learn the ins and outs of how combat works, as well as different aspects that you can perform, specifically melee, range, and magical combat. At its base, Fable operates just like a third-person action game, with the added addition of hotbars to help use items. It's a bit similar to how a Dark Souls game would play, in terms of locking on and hacking and slashing your way through enemies. You also don't have to use the hard lock-on, and your character will soft lock to highlighted targets, while you still get to maintain your camera in a fixed position. As for the different combat aspects, melee is pretty standard, and you just have to spam your attack button until the enemies die. You also get the option to block, and your character is capable of performing it in all directions, even from behind. Not all attacks can be blocked though, so you'll have to dodge roll when needed. Range combat simply involves you equipping your bow and holding down the button, then releasing to fire your arrow. It's very simple, and you also get the option to go into a third-person over-the-shoulder camera to aim and shoot. It's a bit more accurate when you need the aim, but most times, locking on and moving around was more favorable for combat, and even made it feel a little too easy sometimes. With magic, you basically get a good number of spells that you can use for your preferred combat. The game initially has you starting out with a lightning spell, but you can eventually move on to some others that range from summons, close range magic, and other range spells. I'd say there's a good diverse set that you can pick and choose with what you want to specialize into. I think what I like most about the combat system in Fable is that it's not tying you to a specific class or specialization, so you can freely choose how your character operates. Plus, leveling up is actually done in a very interesting way. You get general experience from killing enemies and completing quests, but you also get strength, skill, or magic experience when you use skills in those disciplines during combat. You can use the general experience for all the skills you want to level up, but you can only use the discipline-specific experience in the respective category. I like this leveling system since it incentivizes having to use those disciplines in order to improve their category, rather than just relying on the general experience to level them. As for how I tailored combat to fit my playstyle, I basically played a melee fighter but also dipped into the range and magic skills to complement fights when needed. The biggest magical skills that I did use were Battle Rush to help me take down crowds and knock them down, as well as the Berserk ability to turn into a giant angry cock. Fable's combat was fun, and I liked how customizable it can be with making your character fight the way you want. My only real gripe is that the controls of combat feel a little janky with its targeting mechanics, and switching between target-locked enemies doesn't feel intuitive on mouse and keyboard, and it feels like it should have been played on a controller. For some reason, the Lost Chapters version of Fable doesn't support controller, but the Anniversary Edition does. It feels like a weird oversight when they tried to port the Xbox version over to PC. The questing variety was okay. It does mainly fall into the category of kill this thing or find this thing, which you will definitely be doing a lot of, though I was pleasantly surprised by a few others that didn't require killing or objects, like trying to change your hair and looks for the sake of someone's daughter.
She only likes men whose hair looks like the picture on this card.
Interestingly enough, or flashing your lamp 3 times in a specific area to continue a quest. There's also the demon doors that require you to do a specific action or two in order for them to open up and reveal their loot.
Only a light will reveal it, and you are not bright enough.
Yo, what the fuck? They make for some fun side objectives, but they're not a necessary requirement to finish the game. Regarding the game's immersive or reactive world, I'd say it's appropriate enough in making you want to fulfill your inner hero or evil villain. It's very binary as choices go, so there's very little gray area when it comes to finding anything morally in between. Most times, the situations are set up so that you have to make a good or evil choice towards the end of a quest. The often common choice is whether you want to keep a character alive or not when a quest is over, and usually the killing option is considered to be the evil choice. Personally, since the main plot and its characters weren't the most meaningful for me, I wasn't too invested in the alignment system. My character did end up becoming a good person in the end, but that was mainly just me avoiding evil choices, and I simply ended up making good ones by default. I kind of prefer it when a game gives you a wide range of character personalities and situations that make you take a moral stance, but it didn't really feel like this game gave too much of that at all. It felt more like they just presented you with a situation in which you can decide to be an evil jerk or not. I'm sure everyone's perspective of Fable's plot will be different in how you want to interact with it, but I wish there was a bit more motivation with making me care about Albion's world, other than just for the sake of being a prophesized hero or villain. As for the game reacting to your choices, it mainly comes in the form of public opinion, as the people of Albion either revere your heroicness or despise how evil you are. While it's cool to see that the world reacts to your deeds, it's kind of a bit too much when all they do is shower you with attention wherever you go. Although it's rather rudimentary compared to today's RPGs where usually it's more involved in the story, I do think for 2004 standards, the choice in playing a hero or villain and having the world react to your decisions was definitely a unique aspect of Fable that made it such an interesting RPG back then. Though for an RPG game, I do find the role-playing aspect to be a little disappointing, since stats are primarily used for combat purposes and your character's aesthetics. Since you're a mute character, there's no real conversations for the player to have, and the only meaningful choices are the binary ones he gets with determining how good or evil he wants to be. It is kind of cool though that each of the different skill disciplines actually affect how your character looks. Since I had a lot of strength, my character became more muscular and wider. I've read that your character can also look taller with more skill discipline investment, and can have tattoo-like runes on their body with more magic discipline. I did also find it interesting that your alignment also affects how your character looks. You become progressively lighter looking, and honestly old as heck, if you try to be good, while being evil literally makes you sprout horns. A bit on the nose, but an interesting aesthetic system nonetheless. I actually think it's extremely fascinating that your physical appearance can be tied to your gameplay choices, and you don't really see a lot of that with some of the more modern RPG games. Personally, I feel like it's a nice spin on maintaining and defining your character's physical looks, rather than just relying on the initial editor of a game, or a magic mirror to change your appearance. It's a very definable aspect of Fable, and something I find to be very unique about it. There's also the marriage system in this game, but if I'm being completely honest, I didn't really care for it too much, because marrying some random person you met at a tavern just didn't feel as enjoyable. I want to say it's because I was affected by games whose romantic options have way more personality and are much more enjoyable to approach, so marrying some random stranger just didn't feel the same. Though if marrying random drunk strangers in a tavern is something you enjoy, well, go right ahead. Though I didn't use it, the fact that this game has a marriage option at least adds to the RPG roleplay of Fable. A small variety of light RPG and combat that still makes Fable a bit fun to play, but it is starting to be on the more dated side. For 2004, I'd say the graphics were really good, but not quite jaw-dropping for their time. Considering the other games that came out that year, like Half-Life 2 or Escape from Butcher Bay, Fable doesn't quite stand out by comparison in terms of technicalities. That said though, the cartoony models, natural background, rustic color palette, as well as the fantasy medieval setting help define Fable's aesthetic design, and you can easily tell it is Fable. I like it, but it kind of feels like it's a page that can be taken out of any medieval fantasy setting, something akin to D&D or Lord of the Rings, just with less metahumans. In terms of its graphical presentation, it does feel a bit dated with its lower resolution textures and environments. The hero in his adult years doesn't look too bad, but his eyeballs look like they're ready to come out of his face, and it doesn't help that his child form, along with every other children in this game, have the weirdest head and limb proportions. The animations are also extremely dated, considering how the models simply drop their jaws to animate talking. I'm not sure if this is because of the PC port, but the shadow modeling does look really good for the game, which I think was one of the more standout graphical presentations for games of this era. The UI is a bit on the smaller side, but I want to say that's because of the game supporting the 16:9 aspect ratio rather than the old box ratio of 4:3 that was common in those days. Some of you might need a magnifying glass. Heck, even I felt like I needed one. If you are interested in Fable with a more updated graphical presentation, the Anniversary Edition is probably the better choice for you. For music, the tracks in the game feel like they fit the fantasy adventure vibe of Fable very well. A lot of classical instruments and orchestra that are used very appropriately for various scenes in the game.
His faith in you was well placed. Now come along. The graduation ceremony will take place in the Chamber of Fate, the oldest part of the guild.
Get stuck Stop me, Sasha.
A few tracks like the Guildhall music do stand out, but the overall feel and tone of the game is captured very well in the music, and never feels out of place, no matter the mood. The sound effects are also appropriately fantasy-like for the setting, and don't feel overly dated. I was expecting to hear swords and fists clashing, magical spells being cast, as well as the sounds of various monsters, which is exactly what I got. The voice acting was also good, but I wouldn't exactly call it the best for its time, especially when you again look at games like Half-Life 2, Butcher Bay, and even Halo that have really good voice acting and sound production.
Lamar! Come out of there!
Uh-oh, everything all right, Dr. Kleiner?
Oh, hello, Alex. Well, almost all right. Lamar has gotten out of her crate again.
Summoner creatures, and I'm starting to think throwing away the Sword of Eons wasn't the best idea after all. These things are bad. Too late to do anything now, though.
Perhaps not.
Not bad by any means, but I wouldn't call it the gold medalist of the bunch either. A solid presentation overall, but not one of Fable's strongest aspects. If you look back at Fable in 2004, it was easily an impressive game for its time in trying to achieve a level of player choice and freedom for an RPG. There's a lot that I got to appreciate in its mechanics that are very much standardized with today's games, but there's also some that I think a few modern games lack that could learn a thing or two from Fable, like the physical appearance system or freedom in character progression. While I don't think the story and gameplay feel like the most defining feature, It's how the game attempted to create a level of player agency that makes it feel like the player's own unique experience. Sure, not all of it felt like they were the best or well executed, but it nevertheless created a very Fable experience. Also, the world being on the lighthearted side was a nice mood that fits the Fable universe. Does it hold up though? Well, if you've played every RPG game over the course of many different years up until today, then you'll know how much Fable fits into the now dated category. Oftentimes, there's a certain bit of uniqueness in an older title that's always worth looking into, but it's very hard to recommend Fable on that account, because it feels like many RPG games have evolved and improved many of Fable's systems and mechanics. The physical appearance system is a cool aspect, but you'll have to experience the rest of the game's systems and mechanics in order to appreciate it. It's definitely a recommendation for people who are okay with revisiting an older dated title, or for those who want a nice bit of nostalgia when some random patrons call them arseface.
Arseface!
For me, even though this was a first time visit and there's a bit of datedness that I had to deal with, I still enjoyed looking at it retrospectively and seeing all of its cool mechanics that were so highly praised years ago. I still think it has a bit of unique charm to it, thanks to its lighthearted humor and fantasy world. Now, let's just see how the new Fable game, I think it's technically a reboot, will fare in 2025, and I can't wait to see what it brings to the RPG table that year. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I'll see you all next time.